All right, everybody. So let's go ahead and jump into this. My name is Jason Worth. I'm going to be your host today, going through all of this fun information about how to make sure that your server is prepared for the oncoming ARMS upgrade. Together with me today, I've got Devin Fowler. He will be my co-host. Say hey, Devin.
Hello, everybody.
We're going to be covering all of these topics together, and then at the end, if you do have any questions, Devin and I will be here to answer those questions and make sure that you are ARMS server pros by the end of it. So to kind of get started, a little bit of housekeeping. If you look on your screen right now, you'll see I've got a little PowerPoint slide pulled up. You'll see that if you shake your mouse a little bit, you'll have this bar appear across the bottom, the black bar that's in this image. You can click on participants there, and then you'll see a raise hand button. That's going to be more useful later when we get to the Q&A function. But just so you know, that's going to be how we're going to be able to see that you have a question and then unmute you to ask that question. If you do want to, you can also send your questions in chat as well, and we'll be happy to answer them that way too. All right, so for today, we're going to be covering preparing your ARMS server for an upgrade. Now, most of this is going to apply to vast majority of our customers. If you are a hosted customer, we do a lot of this for you. So if you do have, if you've already started using the SaaS version of ARMS, that means that we host your server, and that means today you're going to get to see all the things that we do for you behind the scenes in the case of an upgrade happening. Otherwise, the vast majority of our customers are still on-prem. That means that you host your own server. Your server is under your control. You maintain the updates, you maintain the server versions, and everything else that kind of goes into there. What we're going to be kind of covering is all the different tasks and things to make note of whenever you are beginning an ARMS upgrade. These mostly are going to occur before you ever even get in contact with us. So these are good things to know, good things to have already prepared, because this is going to make sure that your ARMS upgrade moves very nice and fast. So the first thing I want to show you, this is our server specifications sheet. If you schedule an upgrade with us, this is one of the first things we send you. We send these to every single customer whenever they're upgraded, when we schedule it. On here, you'll see that there's a section for server specifications and also a section for workstation and mobile specifications as well. I'm not going to read this whole document to you. That would be kind of a boring webinar. But to kind of point out some of the high marks of things to pay attention to that are changes in this year's version of ARMS. First of all is the required server version. So you'll notice here, the lowest Windows Server OS that your department can utilize ARMS with now is 2012 Standard Edition. So that's Windows Server 2012 Standard. That's going to apply to SQL as well. You'll notice just below there, the lowest one that they have there is 2012 Standard Edition as well for SQL. Both of these are higher than our previous requirements, which were 2008 R2. Most, if not all of our customers, up till now, should have been running at least 2008 R2 because that was the required version for ARMS. But now, what you'll want to make sure is that your server is at least 2012. Now, if you want a little bit of a suggestion from the ARMS support team, let's not aim for 2012. 2012, as y'all know, is already going to almost be over 8 years old here pretty soon. I would always suggest to our customers to aim for whatever the latest edition of Windows OS and SQL Server are whenever you're upgrading. That's going to always make sure that you're several steps ahead of these changes in requirements, rather than always trying to play catch up and getting to the next, lowest version to move forward. In the grand scheme of things, 2008 R2 has run its course. Windows no longer supports it. Therefore, we no longer support it. Both of these requirements for SQL and for the Windows OS are based on our Microsoft Lifecycle, which is what ARM supports. So the same thing applies with your workstations as well. If Windows no longer supports Windows 7, then we no longer support Windows 7. And that's another good thing to bring up as well there. If you are currently using any old workstations that are running Windows 7, you'll need to upgrade those as well to something newer, at least Windows 8. The Windows 7 has gone off its life cycle as well, and so that means that your department will need to upgrade those workstations. Same thing as before, they're getting quite old at this point. They're all heading into the 10-year mark as far as the age of that OS. So that's definitely something to keep in mind whenever you're kind of looking at your department. Not just the servers are going to be an integral part there, but the workstations as well. Now, the one caveat to that workstation spiel there is for mobile. So for mobile, obviously we're running that out of a browser. So that means as long as the browser runs on that workstation, then mobile will run on it. Once again, a nice tip from IT, go ahead and upgrade them anyway. Even if you're only using that workstation to access mobile through a browser, you're going to be much better off using a much newer OS. Windows 10 would be my recommendation right now, because once again, Windows 7 is no longer on Windows or the Microsoft lifecycle, so that means that you're going to be missing any of those patches, any security updates that are going to be coming. You're going to be missing all those. So you're always going to want to make sure you're staying kind of top of the line there, because once again, that's going to keep you from falling down into one of these lower brackets where you're having to chase an update for an ARMS update to occur. Now, the next thing I want to show you that's going to be a big difference is an SSL. So let's kind of take a step back here for a second. What is an SSL? When you go to a website, you'll notice in a lot of situations, you'll see the normal stuff that you ignore at the beginning, which is HTTPS sometimes just http://www.google.com. That S that I see there, you'll see that right there on my screen. That S is telling me that this site is secured through an SSL certificate. Practically, what this means is that this data is being encrypted between point A and point B. Point A being the workstation that's running the browser, point B being your web server. So you want to make sure that you are within all of the requirements of good data security, and make sure that you have your SSL certificate on your server. The quickest and easiest way to check that, if you are not aware, is to check your URL. If you're already using ARMS Mobile and you type in your URL and go to it, check to see if that S is there. If that S is there, that is the easiest layman's way of seeing whether or not you have an SSL cert installed on your server. If you go to a website ever, doesn't even matter, just for ARMS, and it doesn't have that S there, and it's just HTTP, that means it's just pretty much an open communication between that browser and that web server. Then you start to run into situations where things can be skimmed. Information can kind of be pulled out of that, I don't want to get too technical here, that kind of internet connection between point A and point B there. But once we have that S in there, that means the only parts that are communicating is my browser and that web server. Nothing else is going to be skimming that information between point A and point B. Now, based on that alone, you should already want to put an SSL certificate on your server if you don't have one already. But one of the main reasons why this is for sure required at this point is that a large majority of our users use Chrome. And the types of things that we do with all of the encryptions that we send back and forth, with all of the authentication that we have to use for ARMS to keep within CJIS standards, Chrome no longer allows you to do that unless you are secured through an SSL. So if your department likes using Chrome, obviously that's another good reason to use an SSL. On top of all that, once again, though, it is a requirement now. So that means to have your web functionality running, you will have to have an SSL certificate. One thing to point out here, notice mine doesn't say .com or anything like that on the end here. I've got .local. I'm running this just off of my laptop here. What I want to point out is that we do have some customers that use their mobile software, the browser software, internally, which means that you can't access it from the World Wide Web or from home or anywhere that you want without using a VPN or some other method to get there. Even if you're doing it this way, even if you're only accessing it from your local network at your school, you still want to use that SSL certificate for the exact same reason I just described. If you're using it only on campus, then that means somebody that is also on campus could do that same skimming procedure that we were talking about a second ago. So good things to think about there. An SSL certificate is pretty cheap to get. You can get one from GoDaddy and any of the kind of websites like that that you've probably seen commercials for around $50. It is a yearly fee of about $50, but it's a small price to pay for that added security on your website and your web functionality in ARMS. All right. Now, let's kind of circle back to our upgrade itself. Whenever we're looking at scheduling an upgrade, a lot of times our customers' main concern is when will this affect my users the least? And that's a good concern to have. You know, if you have a busy day on Friday mornings, or something where you're not going to have a whole lot of people available to kind of run your department, you may not want to schedule an upgrade for that time. I understand that. But one thing that I know a lot of our customers miss when they get to scheduling an upgrade is making sure that the correct people are available. When I'm talking about that, I'm talking about IT resources. I'm talking about ARMS administrators. I couldn't tell you the number of times that I've had an upgrade start, and at the very beginning of it, they let me know that the ARMS administrator was off that day. The person who scheduled the upgrade is off that day. The big thing to think about here is whenever you're scheduling an ARMS upgrade, we're going to be touching your server. Your workstations are going to need to be updated. Your users are going to usually experience some sort of, oh, what's this brand new button do type mentality. And for all those three different kind of tiers, you want to make sure that you have the IT support for not only your server, but also your workstation. And then also have your ARMS administrators available to help answer any questions from the upgrade, to help facilitate the upgrade if need be. Sometimes an ARMS administrator is also the person that updates the workstation. Every department's a little bit different in that regard. But that's just something to keep in mind when you're scheduling these, to make sure that not only is does this time work out well for the users, but does this work out well for the support staff, the ITs, the ARMS administrators, and anybody else that may fall into that bucket. All right. Next thing I want to talk to you a little bit about here is some of the pre-upgrade steps that you want to make sure you accomplish before your upgrade occurs. The first one, and one of the main ones, once again, I see a lot of our customers fail at, is running Windows updates. Once again, we run on that Microsoft lifecycle. That means that we are constantly keeping up with whatever the latest release of Windows is, whatever the current patches are for Windows, whatever the current security updates are for Windows. That's one of the things that we kind of pride ourselves on, is making sure that you're always able to run on the latest versions of Windows, make sure that you're always able to run the latest Windows updates to make sure that your server is as secure as possible. But a lot of times what will happen is we will connect up to a server to do an upgrade, and the server has not been restarted in months. I think the longest I saw was a year or so between a workstation being restarted. You can see here on mine, I just pulled up Task Manager and went to Performance. You can do the same thing on your server. And down here, you'll usually see uptime. So seconds, minutes, hours, days. So my laptop, which once again is not a server, but it acts as my server in this example, has been up for 3 days. What we normally recommend is restarting your server once every 30 days. That works out real well because Windows generally releases their security patches once a month. So putting those two things together, one big thing to always make sure that you're kind of staying up on your server, even outside of an upgrade, is that your updates are always being ran and that your server is being restarted every 30 days. If that happens, we don't have a problem once we get connected to do the upgrade because your server is decently fresh. It's updated to the latest version of Windows, and we're ready to begin the upgrade. But when we get connected to a server that hasn't been restarted in a couple years, hasn't had any Windows updates applied, there are background items that may not meet our installer's need. So we have to wait for those updates to install. We have to wait for that server to restart before we're able to actually begin that upgrade and begin working on it. And that's just lost time. You know, you've already told your users to get offline, you've called us, you've connected us to the server, and now you're waiting for Windows updates, which if you've ever waited on Windows updates, they can take some time when they're just being done monthly, much less if you're compounding that across a year of your server not being upgraded or updated correctly. So it's just something to keep in mind there. Another item, just once again, another tip from a ARM support specialist. We are a Sql application. Sql is very RAM hungry. You'll notice right now I'm running this laptop and it's at 75% RAM usage. If I look at my processes, more than likely, yeah, the very top thing that's running all my RAM right now is Sql. Sql constantly tries to take as much RAM as it can. If you leave your server up for months, years on end, Sql will continue to try to consume as much as it can. If you're not doing that maintenance regularly, Sql can get out of control and can begin to slow your server down. We get calls all the time for customers that are experiencing slowness, and our first suggestion is just restart it. Sounds kind of silly, but restarting it will usually clear out that Sql sort of cached RAM and allow it to kind of cool down, get back to a nice normal level of usage, and get you back in the game using ARMS much faster and a much zippier system at the end of the day. All right, next thing. One of the most important parts of any upgrade are making sure that you have backups. You'll notice anytime if you've watched us do an upgrade for you before, we will take a SQL backup before we do anything, pretty much any kind of support that we do. If we're touching your SQL server, we will make a backup before we make any changes to your data. The point, obviously, is to make sure that if anything does happen during the upgrade, however unlikely that is, we can always restore the database and get your department back up and running with the most up-to-date version of your data. But some people lose track of what needs to be backed up. The more that you back up, the better. Your backup limitations are only limited by the amount of space in whatever location you're storing your backups at. This is the standard one that you've probably seen us do a million times. If I go into my SQL server, I right-click on ARMS, I go to Tasks, I go to Backup down here, and that will allow me to back up my SQL database. This should be occurring at least daily, if not twice a day. If you want a reference point for how often we are backing up our databases for the customers that we host, we take full backups twice a day, and then we take partial backups, which are basically backups of just the changes that have occurred, every 2 hours. So that means at any point in time, we can restore a customer. If we had a total server loss, that means that Microsoft as a company completely went offline. If we had a total server loss, we could restore a customer back to up and running at a maximum of 2 hours of lost data at any point in time. The backups there, though, are only affecting SQL. We also need to make sure we're backing up the ARMS media folder. Now, generally, your ARMS media folder is going to be in a kind of standard location. If I go into the right folder, mine is right here. By default, this is where we usually put the media folder when we're installing a server for the first time. The media folder, just like what it sounds, is all of your media. This is everything that you've stored that is not just text. So these are images, these are audio files, these are video files, these are Word documents, PDFs. That folder needs to be backed up as well. You can back it up a few different ways. I kind of showed you how to do SQL a second ago. We're not going too deep into this, but if I send this to a compressed folder, I can take that compressed folder and then move it off the server to another location, and now I have a backup of my media folder. The SQL backup will usually only take a few minutes. Your media backup, on the other hand, though, if you are a user whose department puts in a lot of media, let's say terabytes worth, you can imagine that action right here could take some time. So that's when making that media backup beforehand, before an upgrade, is a very smart idea. Because then not only did you make the backup, so you feel better, you sleep better at night, but you also save us time when it comes to doing an upgrade. You, once again, have less risk. Your upgrade is much more carefree and breezy because you're basically at no possible chance of losing any data. Once again, if somebody walks in mid-upgrade and puts a bullet in your server, you have that backup. You can be restored back to the latest data set that your department is running. Now, one thing to point out in both these situations, if we are doing an upgrade and we make backups of these items, we're generally making these backups locally. You're much better off, going back to our backup strategy for times outside of an upgrade, you're much better off making those backups and storing them off the server. If we go back to my example of somebody putting a bullet in your server, if your backups are also on that server, guess what? You've now lost all your data. So this way, you can take your backups, move them somewhere else, move them to a safe location, can be stored in the cloud. There's companies out there like CrashPlan and things like that that will store your backups for you. And then once again, you're even more protected from risk. For the purposes of an upgrade, once again, we generally don't have people shooting servers in the middle of an upgrade. We do make those backups and we do keep them locally just because they're there as reference points in case we need them to roll your department back to a previous version or whatever the case may be there. It's just a security measure. Now, another thing to think about when we're talking about backup strategies, the fastest way to do all of this would be to use a server image. Now, just as much as you saw me act like I was about to make a copy of this media folder, a server image is like making a copy of the entire computer. So that means, once again, if somebody walked in and put a bullet in your server, you could easily take that image, restore it on a new machine, and you're back up and running to 100% there. My one caveat that I would tell you for that is that in the past, we have seen problems with server imaging and SQL databases. SQL databases don't generally play very nicely with having somebody take a picture of them. So in those situations, I would still suggest taking a backup of your SQL server and taking an image of the server, because then you have your OS covered, your media folder covered, and then your backup of your database can be restored if needed. But that's just kind of one thing I wanted to point out there. If you are using server imaging, then you can probably disregard much of what I was talking about with media, because your image will have a picture of that media folder that can be restored at any time. But I would still suggest making that backup of your database to ensure that you have that standalone backup for your SQL data as well. All right. Next up here, talking about ports. Now, this one is less of a concern for an upgrade because generally your ports are going to be already open. If we're upgrading you, that means that you already have the correct ports open. Make sense? You were using ARMS, it was using those ports, so we're going to upgrade you. It's going to continue using those ports. However, just to make sure, you can disregard my firewall being off, very not secure there. But the point is a good thing to always make sure that you have your ports open for ARMS to be able to function correctly. So to kind of give you an example of what a port rule would look like in your firewall, we do have some standard ports that everybody uses. Quad 5 is the main one that the client uses. 9000 is what your CAD client uses. And then last but not least on there, we need to put in one for our web functionality. Now, in the past, what we've told people is you could put in port 80 or port 443. Those are the two main web ports that pretty much every website will use. However, with this new requirement that we were talking about earlier with the Ssl certificate, you can close off and secure your server further by closing out port 80. You'll no longer need that. Port 443 is the SSL port. So that means post-upgrade, if you were using port 80 and a non-secure website, you can remove that hole in your firewall and be more secure, less available for any sort of attacks from the web, and only keep 443 open because that's all you're going to be using because you're using an SSL certificate because it's now required. All right. Next thing we want to talk about is making sure that you have your credentials available. This is another kind of gotcha moment that we run into with a lot of our upgrades. We get connected, we begin working on the upgrade, and then we ask the user for the user account credentials, and they ask, what is that? If you ever are curious to know what your user account is that is running ARMS on your server, if you go into your services window, like I have pulled up here, and notice your two ARMS services here, ARMS v3 and then the ARMS remoting server, out here to the side, you'll see what user is currently running that account. You'll need to make sure that you have that username and password to be able to do the upgrade. We cannot do the upgrade without it. By policy, we do not keep those logins. If for whatever reason your IT department gave us a password at one point in time, we have deleted it. We do not retain those. That is a huge security concern that we don't want to get into. So your department, your IT, or whoever is usually in charge of that, will need to have that username and password prepared for the upgrade. We'll use that through the upgrade. We don't have to know it. They can type it in while they're connected with us on the server. In fact, we prefer not to know it. But that is where you would find those that credential name, and then you can ask your IT department about where the password is for it as well. Now that account itself should have some special abilities to it. We usually recommend making sure that it's a local administrator, which you can do that in the control panel as well on the server. It needs to have read-write permissions to that media folder that we were talking about earlier. The password for that account should not expire. That's another one. We get a lot of calls, even outside of an upgrade. You get a lot of calls on weekends because passwords expire or get changed, and then over the weekend the server restarts. And this service is only going to check to make sure that password is right when it starts. So when it starts, it's going to look at it like you apply updates to the server, restart the server. It's going to then check that administrator account and the password and make sure they're correct. So even though you changed the password a month ago and nothing broke, a month later your server can restart and then all of a sudden ARMS won't work. So that password should be set to not expire, and nobody should have the ability to change that password. It's, once again, kind of outside of the scope of an upgrade. That's just going to make your life easier and keep you from having to call us on the weekend. All right. Now, one thing to point out, this is an older requirement, but something we do still run into from time to time. We had a requirement last year that was added in to our SQL requirements for full text authentication to be put into our full text specification to be enabled on your SQL server. You cannot install ARMS without that being installed on the SQL server itself. There's an easy way to check though. You've noticed I've pulled up my SQL Management Studio here, and I can easily check to make sure that I have that enabled by running this command. And once again, this command is one that we send out to a user anytime that they schedule an upgrade. So if you don't want to write it down right now, that's fine. We will be sending it to you if and when you schedule an upgrade with our department. So if I execute this, this will give me a 1 if I have that feature enabled. It'll give me a 0 if I do not. If I have a 0, I can't upgrade this server. But if I have a 1, then I can. Then once again, this is a requirement that was put in last year. So if you're on a 2019 release, you're probably fine. But once again, it is a full stop on an upgrade if that's not there. So it is a good thing to still check prior to an upgrade to make sure that you have that enabled on your server. To enable it, if you ever do run into that situation, you have to rerun your SQL installer, the same one that I ran to install this originally, and it'll give you the option to add features. And you can choose this full text specification property to add as a feature to your existing installation. So you don't have to completely reinstall SQL, but you do have to run the installer. All right. Now, so we've gotten a lot of the basic server tasks kind of out of the way there. The last few things I want to talk to you about here is ways to speed up your upgrades. A lot of them that we've already talked about, if you have all those bases covered, that will speed up your upgrade considerably. And in some cases, we'll make sure you get an upgrade. But some other ways that your department can speed up this process to make sure your downtime is as small as possible. First item is downloading all of the installer files beforehand. We can send you a link to the installers, and you can download all those files before the upgrade begins. And that's just going to save us the time it takes to do the same thing once we're connected. So if you download, if you know your network is notoriously slow at downloading things, which we do have some customers that I could tell you what their network speed is, and it's low. If you know you have one of these types of networks on your campus, go ahead and ask us for that link. We can send it to you, and you can download all those installers beforehand and have them waiting on the server. And that's going to save you some time when it comes time for us to connect to the upgrade. Another item that I see a lot of our customers could benefit from is installing the prereqs as soon as they're ready to be installed, basically. Kind of a little more information on that. Whenever we're doing an upgrade, if there are any sort of workstation prereqs that need to be installed, they generally can only be installed after the upgrade is completed. That is because the previous client will usually use an older version of those prereqs. So if you uninstall those to install the new ones, your previous client will not work. So that's why we usually suggest waiting until the upgrade is finished. However, there is a point about halfway through an upgrade where your department can begin upgrading workstations. So even though the actual upgrade itself has, let's say, 60 minutes left before it's going to be completed, your workstations can be go ahead and start updating those, which is why having those specific personnel on hand available for your upgrades comes in handy. Because if you've already got your workstation IT techs, whatever you want to call them, already ready and waiting, they could be doing that and handling that while the rest of the upgrade is finishing. That means that your workstations will be updated faster. That means that as soon as the upgrade's finished, your users can get back online and everybody's kind of happier at the end of the day. Most of our departments, what we see is we'll begin upgrading them. The person that updates the workstations is also the person that we're on the phone with for the server, or some combination like that. So that means that the workstations don't even get touched until after the upgrade is finished completely, which we usually say to allow for about 2 hours for downtime for an upgrade. So you can imagine how much faster this can be if your workstations are already getting updated prior to the actual upgrade finishing up. And the last part that I want to point out that would make your upgrades much faster is using our web components more. If you're already a mobile user, great. If you're not a mobile user, talk to us, let us know. We can send you a quote, figure out how to get your department on mobile. But the main thing there is the web components are live and available as soon as the upgrade is finished. That means that there's no workstations to update, there is no prereqs to install, it's up and running, ready to go. That means that the web users are going to be the first users back online whenever that upgrade is finished. The more users you have using the web, the less users you have using the thick client, the easier your network is going to be to support as far as ARMS is concerned. The better features the users are going to have access to because our web platform has all of our latest features on it. And it's just going to give them that kind of ease of use in a kind of a newer UI compared to the older ARMS client. So basically what I'm comparing here is the older case management screen to something like our newer case management screen, which is just newer, it's easier, it's better to use. In a perfect situation, a department will only use the thick client on dispatch workstations, and every other user within the department will use this web platform. That would mean that if you're running, let's say, a 3 dispatch workstation comm center, you would only have 3 workstations to actually touch after that upgrade is finished. Every single other workstation that uses the browser is already ready to go. No changes needed there. All right. Well, that is about all I have to cover with you all today. So what we're going to do now is we're going to kind of move into some Q&A here. Let me pull up my fancy Q&A screen. There we go. So if you do have any questions, we talked about it before. You can shake your mouse a little bit and you'll see the participants. You can click on participants and then click raise hand, and then we'll be happy to unmute you and allow you to ask any questions you may have. Oh, looks like we got a chat here. Hold on just a second, let me read this. All right, so Dennis's question is, oh, did you say something, Devin?
Yeah, I was just saying while you were reading that, if you don't have a mic or anything like that, you can click on that chat button down there in that same black bar and type out something that we can, and we can read your chat there too.
All right, so Dennis's question is in regards to that service account that we were talking about earlier. His question is in the use of the administrator profile with the ARMS SQL database. Can the standard ARMS user profile be used, or if we create a new user and place it in the domain admin group, he would prefer to avoid using of an administrator profile password? Yes, there's no problem there, Dennis. You can create an account. There's a few different configurations you can do here. You can create a non, domain admin account and use that for your service account. For specifically accessing SQL, you could also just set up Sql Authentication. So for anybody that doesn't know what that is, if I go into my database security here, you'll notice I've got a whole bunch of different accounts listed here. I have a SQL user named ARMS user, and I have a Windows or a domain user, which is my account, jason.worth-a. This account is only in SQL, this account is on my domain. I can use either of these to connect to my SQL database for ARMS purposes. So either way is fine. We can basically meet either of those. Does not have to be a domain admin. Does not have to be a a personal account from anybody. In fact, I would suggest it not be anybody's personal account that runs it. And then if you really wanted to kind of add another login to it, you could use this SQL Authenticated login to access the database as well. I hope that answered your question, Dennis. Any other questions?
And if you are typing a question into the chat, go ahead and just send something that says question or a quick word, just so we know that you're typing in there.
All right. All right, guys. Well, thank you for your time. If you do have any other questions, feel free to reach out to us. You can always reach us at support@arms.com. You can also give us a call, 1-800-776-6783. We will be putting a copy of this webinar on our webinar page as well on our website, arms.com/webinars. Is that right, Devin?
Yep, that's right.
Yep, arms.com/webinar. Is it plural webinars or is it just webinar?
Yeah, it's going to be plural, arms.com/webinars. And you'll also get an email about every webinar from this week being posted on there and to our YouTube page. And you should get that this Friday.
Yep. And like I said, if you do have any other questions, feel free to reach out. Otherwise, thank you for your time, and I hope everybody has a good day.
All right. Thanks, guys.